Racist police shaved a black woman's head in court, then stunned when she took the bench. Before we dive into today's story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. It started like any other day until it didn't. A black woman stepped into the courthouse, calm, composed, completely unaware that she was about to be assaulted by the very people sworn to uphold the law. They thought she was nobody. They laughed. They mocked. They laid hands on her. But what they didn't know was that they had just targeted the wrong person, because she wasn't just another citizen. She was the one person who held the power to destroy them, legally. What followed was a storm of justice, of exposure, and a courtroom twist that would flip everything on its head. Stick around. You're not ready for what's coming. And hey, tell us where you're watching from and what time. Drop it in the comments below. It was just after 8 a.m. when Danica Hayes stepped out of her silver Buick and approached the front steps of the Bay Ridge Federal Courthouse. The early sun spilled softly through the Spanish moss trees, casting long shadows across the stone steps. Danica adjusted the collar of her navy blazer, squared her shoulders, and clutched a slim leather portfolio in her right hand. Her heels clicked quietly against the pavement, each step a quiet declaration. She never wore her judicial robe outside the courtroom. She preferred to walk in like everyone else, quiet, observant, unassuming. But that day, she wasn't greeted as a judge. She wasn't even seen as someone with authority. To them, she was just another black woman stepping into a building where power had never come easy. At the main security checkpoint, the atmosphere shifted the moment she approached. Deputy Owen Griggs, a court bailiff known for his rigid attitude and old-school mindset, narrowed his eyes at her as she neared the metal detectors. He didn't recognize her, and more importantly, he didn't care to. He stepped forward, thick arms crossed over his chest, and held up a gloved hand. "Ma'am," he said, voice flat and gruff, "I'm going to need you to step out of line." Danica paused just briefly. "Is there a problem, officer?" Griggs didn't answer right away. His eyes scanned her tightly coiled silver hair, her pressed slacks, the calm confidence in her expression. Something about her bothered him. She looked like she belonged, and in his world, people like her needed to be reminded who was really in charge. No ID displayed. "You can't just waltz into a federal building looking like that," he muttered. Danica calmly reached into her blazer and produced her federal credentials. The badge glinted under the overhead lights, but Griggs didn't even look at it. He took it from her hand, gave it the briefest glance, then slipped it into his pocket. Danica raised an eyebrow. "I'd like that returned." He stepped in closer. "You in a rush to get somewhere, sweetheart?" The word hit like a slap. A second guard, a younger woman posted by the X-ray scanner, shifted uneasily. She clearly felt the tension, but she said nothing, just watched. "I need to get to a courtroom," Danica said firmly. "Then you'll follow my procedure," Griggs snapped. "That includes random checks." "Let's go." He didn't give her time to respond. With one heavy hand gripping her upper arm, he led her away from the main hall and down a side corridor, into a windowless screening room beyond the security zone. The air inside was cold, stale, clinical. A steel chair sat in the middle of the room. A rolling cart of scanning equipment rested against the far wall. On a tray beside it, a pair of electric clippers. Danica's heart thudded once in her chest. "I don't consent to this," she said clearly. "You have no legal cause to detain me." "You're acting suspicious," Griggs said, motioning to the chair. "That's cause enough. I won't sit." He leaned in close. "You think that badge you flashed means something?" "Not here. Not to me." The door opened. Two other officers stepped in. One, a man in his 30s with a shaved head and nervous eyes, grabbed Danica's left wrist. The other held down the chair's armrest. Danica's voice rose. "This is a violation. I want your names." No one answered. Instead, Griggs picked up the clippers. "What are you doing?" she demanded. "Standard protocol," he said with a smirk, gesturing to her hair. "You could be hiding something in that mop." Danica tried to stand, but a sharp grip shoved her back into the chair. The clippers buzzed to life. The sound filled the room like a swarm of angry bees. Before she could react, the cold vibration touched her scalp. A thick coil of silver hair fell to the floor. Then another, and another. Her breath caught in her throat, but she didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't even blink. She sat there as her dignity was stripped away, strand by strand. She watched it fall to the tile floor, the pieces of her identity, her history, her pride. Laughter came from one of the guards. "She looks better already," he muttered. "Should have come in here with some respect," Griggs said, brushing hair off his sleeve. "Now you look more presentable." Danica's fists clenched in her lap. Her knuckles turned pale from the tension, but her voice, when it came back, was calm. "You'll regret this," Griggs sneered. "People like you always say that." And just like that, it was over. Griggs opened the door and gestured lazily toward the hallway. "You're free to go." "Courtroom's that way," he said mockingly. Danica rose slowly, her hands trembling ever so slightly. She took her badge back from his desk without asking. Her steps were even, her expression unreadable. But inside her chest, something was burning. Hotter than rage, deeper than humiliation. It was purpose. And in just a few minutes, that purpose would change everything. Because what Deputy Griggs didn't know was this. She wasn't there to observe. She wasn't a defendant. She wasn't just another woman passing through security. She was the judge, and she was about to take her seat. The clippers buzzed in Danica's ears long after she left that cold, windowless room. Every step she took toward the courtroom hallway felt heavier, not with fear, but with fury she kept tightly controlled. Her scalp tingled where her hair had once grown in silver coils. Each strand had taken years to nurture. They were more than hair. They were memory, history, identity. Now, only uneven tufts remained. The silence in the corridor was suffocating. She passed two clerks. They looked at her, then quickly looked away. They had heard, maybe even seen, but neither said a word. She didn't stop. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. Up ahead, she could hear the low hum of voices. It was a high-profile morning, a misconduct hearing involving several officers accused of using excessive force during a protest the year before. National attention. Heavy press. Danica was scheduled to enter from the private chambers. Her robe was waiting there, pressed and ready. Her staff had prepped the docket. The plan was for decorum. But today, that didn't matter. She stopped outside the courtroom doors, inhaled deeply, and pushed both doors open. The room stilled. Conversations cut off mid-sentence. Heads turned. And then, realization rippled across the courtroom like a wave. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble floor. She walked past rows of attorneys, journalists, plaintiffs, and defendants. Some stared in confusion, others in disbelief. At the front, behind the judge's bench, the chair sat empty, waiting. And then it hit them. The woman they had watched be escorted down the hallway like a suspect. The woman whose scalp bore the brutal evidence of assault. She wasn't a victim of circumstance. She was the judge. Danica stepped behind the bench and turned slowly to face the courtroom. Her expression was calm, cold even, the kind of calm that came not from peace, but from precision. Someone dropped a pen near the defense table. By the side door, the same man who had held the clippers, Deputy Owen Griggs, stood at attention. Their eyes locked. He went absolutely still. His lips parted, but no sound came. The blood drained from his face. Danica didn't flinch. She reached for the robe folded neatly over the chair's arm. She didn't ask for assistance, didn't wait for formality. She slipped it on herself, one deliberate movement at a time. The black fabric settled on her shoulders like armor. She turned to her court clerk. "Is the docket ready?" she asked, voice even. The clerk swallowed. "Yes, Your Honor." Danica nodded, then lowered herself into the chair. The leather groaned quietly beneath her. She looked straight ahead. Her gaze didn't touch Deputy Griggs. Not yet. Not directly. "We will begin today with preliminary testimony in case number 2371F, United States v. Bay Ridge Police Department," she said, her voice steady. "Charges include abuse of power, excessive force, and violation of civil rights." All parties present? A murmur of "yes, Your Honor," echoed back. The attorneys shifted in their seats. Some were wide-eyed, others guilty. A few looked furious that a black woman had walked in after what they assumed had broken her. She ignored them all. "We will proceed." The first witness was a patrol officer. He had been on duty during the protest in question, a man who had shoved an elderly veteran to the ground, breaking two of his ribs. Danica listened, took notes, asked no questions. Not yet. From the corner of her eye, she saw Griggs slowly backing toward the courtroom exit. His hands twitched near his belt. His legs shifted. He looked like he wanted to disappear. And he was right to be nervous. After the second witness, Danica called a recess. The courtroom emptied in a daze. Even the attorneys whispered, as if afraid to raise their voices. She remained seated. Minutes passed. When only her clerk, 2 officers, and Deputy Griggs remained in the room, she finally looked at him. "Deputy Griggs," she said, voice like glass. He froze. "Step forward." His mouth opened. Yes, Your Honor." She motioned toward the open space in front of the bench. He walked toward it slowly, like a man moving toward the edge of a cliff. "State your full name for the record." He blinked. "Excuse me?" "You heard me. Owen Griggs. How long have you served as bailiff in this courthouse?" 14 years. She tapped her pen against the desk. "Once, twice. And in those 14 years, how many women have you assaulted in that screening room?" The color drained from his face. Your Honor, I didn't know who." "That's not what I asked." He looked around, desperate. No one came to his defense. "How many complaints have been filed against you, Deputy Griggs?" I'm not sure." Danica leaned forward. Her tone didn't rise in volume, but in weight. 12 formal complaints, all buried, all dismissed. "Because you hid behind procedure and protocol." His mouth trembled. "I didn't know who you were. I thought, and that's the problem, isn't it?" She snapped. Her voice cracked through the silence. "You thought I was no one. Just another black woman you could bully, shave, humiliate. For sport." The courtroom was still. "You didn't even bother to ask for my name." Griggs tried to speak, but nothing came. Danica stood from the bench. "Because of you, this courthouse, this so-called temple of justice, has been tainted. Because of your actions, the sanctity of this court is in question. And because you assaulted a federal judge in her own building, you are now the subject of a criminal investigation." She turned to the 2 officers standing at the exit. "Escort Deputy Griggs into custody, separate holding from general population, formal charges to follow." The officers moved quickly, cuffs already in hand. "No, wait. Griggs shouted. "You can't do this." But he was wrong. She already had. The courtroom no longer felt like a courtroom. Not after that. Deputy Owen Griggs, once a fixture of control and intimidation, was gone, escorted out in cuffs. His badge surrendered, his power stripped. But the aftershock lingered. It was in the way the ceiling fans hummed just a little too loudly, in the sidelong glances exchanged between staff who had known and said nothing. Danica Hayes sat back in her chair, her fingers laced calmly on the bench, her robe resting on her like steel. There was no going back. And truthfully, she didn't want to. Something had shifted, not just inside her, but inside the room itself. Her court clerk entered quietly, holding a fresh stack of notes. "Your Honor," she said cautiously, "the next witnesses are being prepped." Danica nodded. "How long?" "About 8 minutes." Danica glanced past her, out toward the empty gallery. Rows of benches, places where jurors, journalists, and citizens would soon return. But she could still feel Griggs's presence, like an oil stain on polished marble. She exhaled slowly. The day had already defied every expectation, and it was only mid-morning. The door creaked behind her. Danica turned. A young woman stepped inside, early 20s, glasses fogged from rushing in. One of the interns. Her name was Erica Lomax, quiet, observant, the kind of person who never spoke unless spoken to. Now she stood pale and anxious in the doorway. Danica gave a small nod. "Everything okay?" Erica hesitated. Then she stepped forward and closed the door behind her. I wanted to say I saw it," she whispered. "What happened with Deputy Griggs? This morning, outside the screening room, I didn't know what to do. I should have said something. I was scared." Danica didn't answer immediately. She studied the young woman's trembling hands, then finally said, gently, "Thank you for telling me. That matters." "I didn't stop it." "No," Danica replied. "But you're speaking now. That's more than most." Erica straightened a little. Her voice gained a bit of weight. "If you need me to testify, I will." Danica reached across the desk and placed her hand over the girl's, just for a moment. No words, just warmth. The courtroom doors creaked again. Heavier this time. The public was returning. Danica stood. "All rise," the clerk called, her voice steadier now. Everyone did. Even the ones who didn't want to. Even the ones who once laughed at Griggs's jokes behind closed doors. Danica resumed her seat. Court is back in session. The next witness took the stand. A black father named Malcolm Red, mid-40s, a warehouse foreman, salt and pepper beard, hands rough from labor, eyes hollow from grief. He was there to testify about his son, 17 years old, tackled and pinned by police during a peaceful protest. One officer, still seated at the defense table, had crushed the boy's windpipe with his knee. The teen survived. Barely, but he still couldn't speak above a whisper. That had been 9 months ago. Malcolm sat on the stand and told the court everything. How they'd begged for paramedics. How they were told, "He'll be fine. He's faking." How no one listened. And how, even after video footage surfaced, none of the officers had been disciplined. Danica didn't interrupt once. She didn't need to. Every word Malcolm spoke cut through the courtroom like a blade, sharp, real, undeniable. When he finished, Danica leaned forward. "Mr. Red, thank you for your courage. I know this isn't easy." He nodded, his voice cracking. "I just want to know it meant something, that someone finally listened." Danica looked at him, not as a judge, but as someone who knew exactly what it felt like to be silenced. "You've been heard," she said. A few minutes later, after he stepped down and walked past the officers who had nearly killed his son, Danica called for another short recess. In her chambers, the quiet was almost too much. She stood at the mirror above the wash basin. Her uneven hair, the raw patch above her left ear. The woman staring back at her didn't look like a judge. She looked like someone who had just been through a war, but maybe that's what justice was. Not a performance of poise, but a battle for truth. And she had no intention of losing. A knock. The clerk again. "Your Honor, the district attorney's office just submitted a sealed motion. They want to escalate charges against Griggs immediately. Civil rights violations under federal law." Danica didn't blink. Good. Accepted. As the door closed, she allowed herself a single breath. Not relief. Resolve. Because this wasn't over, not even close. Back in the courtroom, the gallery had doubled. Word of what had happened earlier, of Griggs's arrest and the judge's reveal, had spread. Fast. Reporters now live-streamed from the back rows. People gathered outside, watching from their phones through courthouse windows. When Danica entered again, the room rose. This time, it felt different. Not just out of tradition, not just for her title, but for what she represented. She tapped the gavel once. "We're ready to proceed." The next witness was unexpected. The U.S. Marshal's office had sent someone, not to investigate, but to testify. Marshal Everett Kane. Black. Late 50s. 20 years of service. A slight limp from an arrest gone wrong in 2001. He had worked in this very courthouse years ago. Now he returned, not with excuses, but with a truth he could no longer bury. He took the oath, sat down, adjusted the mic. "I worked here from 2004 to 2012, he said. "I saw a lot. Most of it I let slide. I didn't want trouble, didn't want to be labeled the angry black officer." He looked straight at Danica. "But what I saw from Griggs, I should have reported. I didn't, and I regret it." Danica nodded, letting him speak. He started small, disrespect, over-policing young men, making comments. But it got worse. By 2010, he was dangerous. "Did you report him?" the prosecutor asked. "I filed a memo with Internal Affairs," he said. It disappeared. When I asked, I was told, quote, "He's the kind of man we want handling difficult people." The courtroom recoiled. Murmurs, outrage. Danica's gavel silenced them. Marshal Kane leaned forward. "I left this courthouse 2 years later, not because I was done working, but because I couldn't carry the silence anymore." He looked at Danica again. "Judge Hayes, what you did, sitting in that chair after what they did to you, that's bigger than a bench." The room held its breath. And Danica, for the first time all day, didn't answer. Not because she was speechless, but because sometimes when history stands in front of you, you let it echo. The next morning, the sky over Bay Ridge was heavy with clouds. A gray curtain hung over the city, pressing down like a warning. But inside Judge Danica Hayes' chambers, the silence was colder than any storm. She sat at her desk, staring at a thick manila folder marked confidential internal records. A court administrator had handed it to her without a word, left it on her desk like it burned to touch. Danica opened it slowly. Inside, memos, emails, signed statements. 12 formal complaints against Deputy Owen Griggs. 15 years of abuse, ignored, each dismissal signed by a name she knew too well, Judge Marcus Whitlow, her mentor, the man who had once sponsored her into the federal circuit, the man who had once said, "You're exactly what this bench needs." Now, his signature sat at the bottom of every denial, stamped with words like allegation, unsubstantiated, no corroborating evidence, no further action required. Then, tucked at the back, one memo stood out, a confidential message between Whitlow and the head of courthouse security. It read, "Griggs may be rough around the edges, but he keeps order, especially with certain groups. Best to leave well enough alone." Danica's fingers curled around the page until it crumpled. There it was. The quiet part said out loud. This wasn't just about Griggs anymore. It was the entire machine that had protected him, that had needed him to be exactly what he was. She leaned back, staring up at the ceiling. This wasn't just a case. It was a purge. A knock at the door. Her clerk again. "Your Honor, the Senate Judiciary Committee has submitted a formal inquiry. They want your statement on judicial oversight failures related to the Griggs incident." Danica gave a humorless smile. Of course they do. Now that the cameras are rolling, the clerk hesitated. "There's more." 2 retired judges and 1 former DA resigned this morning, citing health reasons. Danica stood. "Bring in the attorneys, all of them. We finish this today." An hour later, the courtroom was standing room only, not just locals anymore. Reporters from the New York Times, Washington Post, even the BBC filled the gallery. A row of young black law students sat shoulder to shoulder in the front pew, eyes wide, notebooks ready. This wasn't just Bay Ridge anymore. This was national. Danica took her seat, tapped the gavel. "This court is in session." She looked to the room. "Before we proceed with closing arguments, I'd like to enter new material into the record." Her clerk stepped forward, handing copies to both sides. "These include all complaints previously filed against Deputy Griggs, all communications regarding their suppression, and the names of every official who signed off on them." The defense attorney began to rise in objection. Danica raised her hand. "Sit down." The words weren't loud, but they hit like stone. She turned to the gallery. "Let the record show that this court is no longer interested in protecting institutions at the expense of individuals. We are no longer pretending that silence is neutrality." Her eyes swept across every corner of the room. Every signature in this folder represents a choice, not a mistake. A choice to ignore victims, a choice to shield predators, a choice to maintain an illusion of order built on fear. Her gaze locked on the defense table. "And it ends today." The room fell into a hush so deep you could hear a pen stop mid-scratch. Then from the back, a man stood, hesitant. "Your Honor," he said softly. "May I speak?" Danica gave a nod. He stepped forward, hat in hand. "My name is Louis Bryant. I was arrested in this courthouse in 2011 by Griggs for raising my voice when my daughter's case got dismissed. He slammed me into a wall, broke 2 ribs. Danica asked, "Was a complaint filed?" "I filed it myself, right there at the front desk. They told me I tripped and fell. That's what the report said. I never came back." He looked around. "But I'm here now." Danica stood. "Anyone else?" A pause. Then, one by one, hands began to rise. 5, 10, 15. Every single one a story. Every single one a silence that had lasted too long. And now, finally, a voice. Danica didn't cry. She didn't smile. She didn't move. She just watched as the truth rose around her, not whispered, not hidden, not masked by badges or robes, but spoken at last. The final day of the hearing opened with rain. Not a gentle drizzle, a downpour. Bay Ridge streets flooded. Power lines swayed. But still, they came. Reporters, protesters, clerks, citizens. They came with umbrellas and signs, because this wasn't just justice. This was history. Inside, the courtroom felt different, hushed, alive. Danica entered, not with fanfare, but with presence. She paused at the bench, then took off her robe, folded it gently, laid it across the chair, no longer shielded by tradition or title. Just a woman, scarred, standing. She spoke. "I've sat behind this bench for years, carried the title, followed procedure, but I've also stayed quiet longer than I should have. Today, I'm done being quiet." She looked to the defense, to the prosecution, to the gallery full of people once silenced. This court finds Deputy Owen Griggs guilty of abuse of power, violation of civil rights, and official misconduct. She paused. But it doesn't stop there. She reached beneath the desk and lifted a folder. This is a policy proposal, effective immediately. It's called the Hayes Mandate. The gallery stirred. It requires comprehensive anti-bias training, psychological screening, regular evaluations, and a zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory behavior inside federal courthouses. She held it up. I will take this to the circuit, to the judiciary, to the Senate if I have to. Because what happened to me should have never happened to anyone, and I will make damn sure it never happens again. Tears welled in the eyes of strangers. Hands gripped each other silently. Danica continued, "This was never about revenge. It's about accountability, about looking a broken system in the eye and saying, 'Not anymore.'" She looked at the officials who enabled Griggs for years. "Consider yourselves on notice." She tapped the folder once more. "I will be forwarding recommendations for disbarment, formal review, and possible charges to the Department of Justice for everyone who helped bury the truth." Then she turned to the officers by the side door. "Bring him in." Owen Griggs entered in cuffs, no longer in uniform. Face hollow, he stood in front of the court as the sentence was read. 6 years for abuse of power, 5 for civil rights violations, 1 for obstruction. Then her voice dropped. "But that's just the legal part." Griggs didn't lift his head. Danica stared at him. "You spent your career deciding who deserved dignity. You thought the badge made you immune, that people like me would never hold the gavel. Well, now you get to sit in the seat you made for others. No badge, no robe, just the weight of what you've done." She nodded to the officers. "Take him away." No applause followed. No cheers. Only silence. Because this wasn't about celebration. It was about witnessing. Danica looked down at the Hayes Mandate, then back to the room. Court is adjourned. That night, Danica walked out of the courthouse without a wig, no scarf, no hat, just her head, bare beneath the streetlights. As she reached the sidewalk, an elderly woman stepped forward. "I never thought I'd live to see someone like you do what you just did," she said, voice trembling. Danica took her hand. "You did more than survive. You paved the road." Behind her, a teenager stepped shyly out of the crowd. No words, just a look. Then she pulled off her hoodie, revealing her own shaved head. She nodded once. Danica nodded back. A silent inheritance. Weeks later, a headline appeared on the courthouse break room fridge. Federal judge refuses to back down after public assault, launches historic reform from the bench. Someone had written in Sharpie beneath it, "She's our judge." And for the first time in a long time, Danica Hayes smiled.